Good evening. You're watching live with Faye on YouTube. Thank you for joining me every evening at 8 o'clock. We go live with issues that should matter most to our country. If you consider what the rest of the media is on right now, you'd think that it's a completely different list of things. But we prioritize on things that we believe citizens want to know about and citizens should know about. So today we're discussing Facebook. Here's a question that we have to ask. Did Facebook go easy on hate speech to a person belonging to the BJP to protect its business interests in the country? That's the allegation that's been made in a Wall Street Journal article that has been released. Now, you must remember, first of all, that Facebook, India is Facebook's biggest market in the whole world. So it's not just Facebook, it's Facebook plus WhatsApp plus Instagram, because all of this is owned by one company. Let me just take you through what the Wall Street Journal said. The Wall Street Journal had said that Facebook deleted a hateful anti-Muslim post by one T. Raja Singh, an MLA from Telangana state belonging to the BJP, only after the Wall Street Journal wrote to Facebook and asked them about it. According to that report, previous Facebook employees had actually had a meeting about a particular post that this T. Raja Singh had put up, which violated very clearly the hate speech rules of the platform, because apparently that particular post called to shoot and eliminate an entire country of people. Now, according to the article in the Wall Street Journal, the Facebook's top public policy executive in India, Ankit Das, had opposed taking down that page, saying that because T. Raja Singh is from the BJP, taking any action against him would damage the company's business prospects in the country. So basically, she said, let's not take any action against this person for making the statement on Facebook, because it will damage our business in India. Now, since that article has come out, the opposition has called for investigations, and the IT minister, Mr. Ravi Shankar Prasad, has responded, effectively bringing up Cambridge Analytica in connection with the Congress, but hasn't specifically cleared or given any sort of response in this matter. Again, 340 million users in India on Facebook. We also have 400 million users on WhatsApp, which is also owned by Facebook. And let's not forget, the crown jewel in this entire story is the fact that Facebook has just invested $5.7 billion in Reliance Jio, which means that Reliance Jio's entire reach will also be accessible now to Facebook. So the question that we're really asking is not about this one story or about this one statement or about this one page. What is the extent of the influence that Facebook has over India? And what kind of good/damage can that do? Now, we should also, in that Wall Street Journal article, there was one thing that was not properly noted by most people in our country. The fact that Andy Stone, a Facebook official spokesperson, acknowledged to Wall Street Journal that Ankit Das had, and I'm quoting now, raised concerns about the political fallout, which would be the result from designating Mr. Singh as a dangerous individual. But her opposition wasn't the sole factor in the company's decision to let Mr. Singh continue on the platform. So here we have a very important acknowledgement. One, that Ankit Das had in fact said that. Two, that while they had a discussion about the fact that T. Raja Singh was a dangerous individual, they decided to continue and to allow him on the platform in spite of what he had said. And they're acknowledging the considerations that they had in that story. So here's what we're asking. Given the considerable influence that Facebook has over the Indian citizenship, can they tilt elections to suit their personal interests? Do they bend rules to suit their political interests? And should we have stronger laws on hate speech? Here's my guest list for today. Nikhil, Pahwa, the founder of Medianama, who's reported on the internet and freedoms on the internet for a very, very long time, joins us right now as a very strong voice. Gopal, Krishna, Agarwal, representing the BJP. Good evening and thank you for joining us. Vaishali, Bhagwat is an advocate and a cyber law specialist. Ritesh, Bhatia, cybersecurity expert and data privacy consultant, joins us as well. Good evening and thank you all for joining us. First question straight to Nikhil, Pahwa. Nikhil, what is the extent? I mean, this is not about one page. This is not about T. Raja Singh's page. This is about the influence that Facebook has over the Indian population. In your mind, how grave is this matter?
No, I think this is a fairly grave matter in the sense that look at the impact that Facebook has on the world. if you look at Nigeria, if you look at Myanmar, you look at Philippines, the impact that Facebook has had on the population, on the elections, in cases of genocide, has been immense, because certain types of people, especially parties in power, Duterte in Philippines, the military, a monk in Myanmar, have been able to use Facebook as a platform to rouse certain sentiments, and also this has led to attacks and on the freedoms of people. So as a platform, Facebook is extremely important. It is extremely impactful. In fact, the framework I'd like your viewers to look at Facebook with is, think of Facebook as a country, as a layer of a country on top of the world, with over 2 billion users. And that's the impact that Facebook can have on the world, on democracies, on governments, which is why China doesn't have Facebook. Right? They don't want that impact. Now, with that kind of power, what are the regulations that are governing these platforms? And to my mind, we're essentially dependent on the benevolence of these platforms to not harm our democracies. So if there is bias, that bias is going to have a direct impact on us as citizenry, on elections. And in certain cases, like Russia did with the US, they can also use the platform without Facebook being complicit in manipulating those elections. Companies are not countries. They don't have an accountability to a population, but yes, they do have a responsibility. But in the end, their accountability is greatest with their shareholders, and they're going to do what is in their best interests, not necessarily what is in our best interests.
Right, and one of our viewers asked, what is hate speech? Now, hate speech is effectively a publicly spoken thing that expresses hate towards a particular community and encourages violence towards a person or a group based on race, religion, sex, or sexual orientation. Now, in the era of obviously, um, social media, when you say something on a platform like Facebook where multiple people can read it, it becomes hate speech. And of course, these platforms have laws, have their own rules about it. They're supposed to be monitoring those rules. But Nikhil, quickly bringing this back to you, Facebook has been sort of hauled over the coals in the US as well for not moderating hate speech, for not moderating, political campaign advertisements that are false. Do you think that, this is similar behavior to what we've seen happen in the US?
It's actually a really tricky situation, Faye, because we have something called safe harbor, which means that platforms are not accountable for the content and the messages that are being sent by the users who are using those platforms. And that essentially means that if they don't have liability for it, if they can't be taken to court for comments made by people like us, then they're able to enable us to make comments and take responsibility for our comments, right? So my fear is, yes, it's being hauled over the coals and for not tackling hate speech, but the final accountability, to my mind, still rests with the police, with the courts. Why, if there was this incitement to violence, and it's very specifically calling for shooting a certain type of people, is incitement to violence, and that's a clear violation of laws in India. Why hasn't the politician been taken to court and held accountable for that? You can't expect Facebook to prosecute them, but we seem to be holding our police and our courts to a different set of standards, and they don't act on clear incitement to violence, and Facebook to a higher set of standards. Why not look at what happened in case of Delhi police and the clear hate speech that came in from two politicians in Delhi, and the violence that erupted afterwards. So I think we should have that kind of accountability for everyone. Um, my primary concern is that, what does this lead to? What is the outcome that we expect from any action that gets taken against Facebook? That they take down hate speech? Sure, but who's going to ensure that? The government is. So do we want to give government more power?
Yes.
And we know how that's ended up for us in many instances, right? Both
Let me bring in Mr.
and the
Gopal
Congress.
Krishna.
Let me just one little finish.
Okay.
A little bit.
Okay.
I just want to remind everyone that 66A was a law created by the Congress that led to two girls being put into jail for something that they said on Facebook. It was, and in court, and I was in court, once the government changed in 2014, the BJP government went to court and supported 66A, right?
Yes.
So I don't necessarily trust governments to uphold free speech. I don't want more government control. All of our options right now are bad. I don't know what the right answer is.
That's a very honest answer. Thank you to Nikhil Karkhanis for supporting us right now. We also have Mayank Saraswat, who has said, love the journalism, Faye, but still there's some hope. What is your take on Reliance buying out TikTok? That's an interesting question. We'll come back to what that does for the valuation of Reliance in the stock market when such buzzes or such rumors do the rounds. But I want to bring in Mr. Gopal Agarwal. Mr. Gopal Agarwal, two questions for you. One, T. Raja Singh is a member of the BJP, if I'm not mistaken. Is he still a member? Has disciplinary action been taken against him? And what is the BJP's official statement about the Wall Street Journal article?
One thing is that we are talking about two commercial organizations. One is Facebook and another is Wall Street Journal. And we are saying that many people are accusing that the Facebook has a BJP bias. And what does the Wall Street Journal has the bias of anti-BJP? We all know that Wall Street Journal has been coming out with various articles, etc., which are not in support of BJP. One thing. Second point important is, second important point that I want to mention here is that Wall Street Journal is referring to some statement being made by the Facebook head in India. So that is the only authenticity that some employee has given them, that this statement was made. Based on that, can we conclude
but Facebook has acknowledged that statement. No, Facebook has acknowledged that statement. Facebook, they have accepted that this was said.
Then the thing is, yes. So what our position is, Facebook has at many times, we have faced this anti-BJP bias at many places. So you cannot say that Facebook is supportive or Facebook is opposing BJP. They may look into commercial, these are commercial organizations. Ultimately, we as a country cannot, or as a party cannot leave this decision of what is hate speech or what is harming the persons or at all to a commercial and a platform like this, private platform. If you at one point Nikhil ji is saying that this overwhelming power of Facebook is dangerous for the democracy, and if now they get this right, will decide what is hate speech, whom they should block, whom they will definitely look into it, and they will have this allegation. This responsibility has to be the law of the land and the police.
Okay, fair enough. But where is the law of the land, Mr. Agarwal? Where is the law of the land right now? When this T. Raja Singh has written on his Facebook, it has been quoted that, and I'll tell you what it says. It effectively said that Rohingya Muslims should all be shot and eliminated. Now, if this is not hate speech, I don't know what else is hate speech, but he's still a member of your party. There is no FIR that has been registered. The law of the land hasn't acted at all.
So, and then third point that I would like to mention here is, we have 18 crore members in BJP. The individual opinion or individual statement is not the party position or statement. We do not confer with what Mr. Singh is saying. As a party, we do not confer to it.
That's good. I'm glad to know that. But are you going to remove him from your party? Or are you going to place him in before the disciplinary committee?
The thing is that we cannot prejudge everything. As I'm telling you, you cannot prejudge the Facebook incidents as Facebook is biased to the BJP. Certain sections are saying there will be a reason.
You're not answering my question, Mr. Agarwal. If you don't want to answer, just say you don't want to answer. I'll move on to the next.
I just want to tell you that this is not in my domain. What disciplinary action will be taken, it will be in the process of the BJP.
So my question to you was,
Mr. Agarwal, let me ask that we do not confer with what Mr. Singh said. And on the face of it, this statement is not right. What action party will take, whatever that is the disciplinary committee will decide.
Okay.
If
So,
he has
so my
said this
question
statement,
was
these are-
to you. One second. You have to listen to my question. My question to you was not what action will your party take. My question to you was, has your party taken any action? That's a yes or no answer. Has
No,
the
I
party
have
taken any action?
no, I don't have any knowledge at present that party has taken. But as far as the thought is there about a statement, we have discussed. This is not our party's stand, and we think that this is not correct.
All right, Vaishali Bhagwat joins us right now. She is a cyber law expert. Ms. Bhagwat, good evening. My concern here is with the lack of laws that we have in the country, the amount, like Nikhil was right, the amount of power that we've handed over to these, to these platforms like Facebook, like Twitter, where we're relying on them to take down hate speech, we're relying on them to take down rape threats. Where is the fault line here, and what's going wrong, and how do we fix it?
So I think first things first, when we refer to all these platforms as intermediaries, we were all under a presumption that they would have a very limited role to play as an intermediary, as a conduit of information, and would not resort to any tactics which will eventually amount to, say, breach of privacy of individuals, affect their constitutional rights of participating in a free and a democratic country, which we all saw that how Cambridge Analytica or how the platforms are also profiling all their users and showing targeted information, influencing minds, and eventually influencing citizens to sort of align themselves to a particular thought. This is a slow process which has already started happening, and it is influencing citizens across the world. So today, my ability to participate in a free and a democratic country, I'm suddenly not very sure whether all the news that I read or I'm fed with by the intermediaries is free and fair. There is an intermediary influence which has gone completely unaddressed in law. The law looks at an intermediary as if they will take information from one source and pass it on to another source, or they will allow people to contribute on the platform and then say, we have nothing to do with the content. And that is how laws have been framed, where the laws say that the intermediary do not have any content liability. The reason behind this was to promote free speech, so that there is no strangulation of people wanting to say what they want to on these platforms. The only regulation intermediaries are subjected to is that if it is pointed out to them by a court of law with proper jurisdiction that this is affecting the laws in the country. It could be hate speech laws, incitement to violence, affecting religious sentiments, it is about child pornography, it is defamatory, all of that. If it comes under that, then the intermediary has to take down the content within a certain specific period of time. This is what the law of the land is. Now, having said this, this was simple to deal with, but now we realize that intermediaries are doing much more than that. And that is something that the laws are not addressing. They're completely silent on it. It is up to the platforms to follow guidelines which have been it's sort of a self-regulation, because there's so much pressure on them, not only from India, but across the world, to regulate certain forms of speech. It could be child pornography, hate speech, etc. It's more in the form of self-regulation. You also asked me that, is there really any hope in terms of, so it is actually a dual, it's a dual sword sort of a thing, where you can't give them control to regulate content, because then we are giving them more power than they deserve. But at the same time, we definitely can make them accountable, because they are messing with our democratic rights. Accountability could be in different forms. There was a nice point which did come up, that they are private organizations and they're answerable only to their shareholders, and then they're not answerable to you and me as citizens. However, if they are properly regulated, they can be made accountable for, say, which is the political party from which funds are going to Facebook, they can come up with a quarterly or a biannual transparency report as to how many posts were taken down by them on their own. This is something that they can be compelled to do, and if there is political will, only then that will happen. Right now we do see that platforms tend to have an attitude of above the law, because they are, nobody's really going after them.
Yeah.
Correct.
In fact, let me just bring in Ritesh Bhatia. This is actually a question for the entire panel. Ritesh, what ability does Facebook, along with WhatsApp and Instagram and Geo, have to tilt our democratic processes? Can they hide certain articles, push forward other articles? Can they make us believe things that are not true? Can they change our minds about certain subjects? What power does Facebook currently enjoy, or what influence actually does it enjoy in India?
Well, Faye, they enjoy it like completely.
You seem to have lost Ritesh.
Text
Yes.
space. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. So, with these platforms, with these particular platforms coming together, it is just not only that they are powerful in the tech space. I think they have become powerful anywhere and everywhere. Not just in our country, but in the world. And this has been like seen time and again. As to what kind of power they actually have. Even if you look at the kind of like your question was, if they can push certain content. Yes, they can not just only push content, but they can also push away certain content. They have those algorithms. They have those people. Have all.
All right, we seem to have trouble with that connection. We'll come back to it. To Nikhil also. Nikhil, coming back to you with that same question. And we know this about Facebook, right? Just because you and I are friends on Facebook doesn't mean that everything that I post on my Facebook timeline will be visible to you. There might be some things that get hidden, some things that will be given priority, some things that will be downward prioritized. So keeping that in mind, what kind of influence are we talking about here? My blunt question is this: can Facebook tilt an election?
Of course it can. And like I said earlier, we are dependent on the benevolence of platforms to ensure that our democracies remain intact, right? They can obviously tilt elections if they want to. The question
Every
is,
media can do it.
right, but the question is, are they doing it? And in this case, you have to separate two specific types of manipulations that happen on our news feeds. One is the algorithmic manipulation that happens, which is based on certain broad overall factors such as what do you spend more time on, who do you interact more with. The algorithm then, and we don't know how this operates because it's all there's no accountability built in, which is why there's a global conversation happening right now on algorithmic accountability. But with algorithms, what happens is that it is based on increasing engagement. It tries to understand what your preference is. If you have 2,000 friends on Facebook, then it is in its interest to show you what is interesting to you according to its algorithms and the data that it crunches about you, right? So, and we need accountability so that there's no manipulation there. The other part is human interference and human manipulation, in which, so in case of algorithmic accountability, an intermediary still remains an intermediary because it is not directly influencing each and like one single item. It's not responsible for manipulating that content, right? It's not picking the receiver. Your behavior effectively is picking the receiver, and there's a whole separate debate to be had on that. But when there's, what we are understanding here is human interference in case of removal of content, and that accountability mechanism, we don't have no transparency on it. We don't know how Facebook operates and how that value chain of decision making operates. Who took the final call to allow that content to stay up? We don't know. We know the recommendation, but that's an ambassador for a country. They'll recommend what's in the best interest of their country. But if Facebook says that it has different global standards and it will not allow hate speech, it will not allow incitement to violence, The buck stops where? We don't know. It doesn't definitely stop in India by the looks of it, because that was a recommendation that was made. So the entity, Facebook overall is accountable for allowing it to stay up. And it needs to be held accountable for allowing hate speech to persist, because that's a decision that they took. But also, I would say that the law enforcement agencies, where there's a clear incitement to violence for killing a particular set of people, what have they done? Because that's a human decision that's been taken at that level also, to allow that person to not go to jail. A case hasn't been filed. So what are governments doing? And I'm not saying the BJP government necessarily. What is the state government in Telangana doing about this? Where is their responsibility and accountability? If Facebook has a human bias, they need to be held accountable. Algorithms make mistakes all the time at one level. In fact, the amendment to the safe harbor rules in India want proactive takedowns of content of certain types. Algorithms are inaccurate. They'll never be able to actually identify what is harmful or what is not. What they do is they flag content, someone goes through it, according to a set of standards, takes a decision for it to be taken down or not. And those people are anonymous. So I'm saying final accountability is with Facebook. If they have a bias and there's a proven bias, take them to task. Parliament needs to look into it. I'm just very concerned about more government intervention in free speech, because I don't trust governments to uphold free speech. And we've seen both parties in the center going against free speech. We've also let's remember, the BJP government and the Supreme Court argued that there isn't a fundamental right to privacy, and they lost. So at one point in time, you could depend on your courts to protect your rights. I don't know if you can do that anymore, but you definitely have a situation where governments will not protect your rights.
Well, right now we have to be careful about what we say.
Faye.
Also, contempt of court. Once again, I just want to read out some messages. Dhruv Bhatta has said that content moderation is accepted as terms and conditions in Facebook. Hence, the person posting on Facebook is liable to the laws, which Facebook is accountable to. Tanvi D says a journalist was arrested again based on a social media post. It feels like anything anti-government is considered hate speech. And there are a couple of other messages. A caravan-sponsored ad or a news article critiquing the government has also been delayed or dropped. It takes not more than 2 days. Mr. Gopal Agarwal, in your previous answer, you had said the Wall Street Journal is effectively anti-BJP. Is that the reason why, when Jeff Bezos visited India last year, he was not given an appointment with the Prime Minister?
So that is for the Prime Minister to decide. What I am telling you from the public articles that we see, from whether it is Wall Street Journal or certain Financial Times, etc. in US, they have an anti-BJP bias. They are, whether it is by of their perception or whatever it may be, but definitely they have the bias. Whether it is justified or not is a different question. But their bias is very clear. Second thing important that I want to mention is that Facebook or any other commercial organization will have a commercial interest. What the government needs to do is any kind of monopoly is the problem, even in the commercial angle also. So we have antitrust act, we have this, even US is finding taking actions against this, even Amazon and e-commerce companies also, they are creating monopolies and problems. So any commercial organization, profit motive is we are accepting. If we are working in a market economy, we are working in a economy right to center. BJP believes in right to center policy, where market economy is an important factor in deciding. Ultimately, government has the role of regulating the level playing field, transparency, controlling monopolies. So this, if you further give this right to decide to what is hate speech, what should be, what action should be taken, etc., they cannot go to Facebook. We have several reservations with Facebook. We have discussed in our party other platforms also, and it is in the public domain also.
What are your reservations?
Reservation of yesterday, day before yesterday, Rajyavardhan Rathorji gave a long article in that. Even this Tejasvi Surya has also mentioned, even that Karnataka MP, BJP MP has said that he has faced several reservations.
So actually, my question to you, Mr. Agarwal, is this. the concerning part for me in this Wall Street Journal article is not more than the hate speech of T. Raja Singh, who's a member of the BJP, was the concern that Facebook had that if they were to take action, that they would face backlash and they would be targeted and the business would suffer because the government would actually come after them. This is worrying for a company of this size to feel that they cannot take action because they're concerned that the government will begin to target them. Now, I could go around asking other CEOs, but what's your response to that?
Yeah, this is the problem. I tell you, every commercial organization, we should understand that they will work with this mindset. But this exists is the Wall Street journals that the BJP is controlling them. They will have this mindset. I'm not denying it. Every commercial.
This is nothing to do with the Wall Street Journal. Facebook has accepted on paper, in writing, that they had in fact had this conversation. That this individual from the leadership team had been worried about backlash from the government.
So for what issue concerns us? Is this that Facebook may have this bias or not? This is the concern. I'm telling you, I am also having a concern.
You're also
Facebook
concerned.
may have this concern. So the thing is whether BJP is
that
using
means,
that
means, Mr. Agarwal, if Facebook has this concern, then you don't have a free market. Then it's not a right-wing free market.
So we should not allow. That's what we are saying. We have to regulate Facebook. We do not want monopoly. So the thing is the monopoly, and I also, even on the free speech, freedom of speech, you see the court cases, their decision, they are not able to decide what is free speech. You see, they have, even Supreme Court has given certain decisions, then overruled them. Then again, what is free speech? So these are the complicated.
That's not accurate. I'm sorry. That's not correct.
Let me open this up to the rest of the panel. I also want to point out that a journalist was arrested today. Prashant was arrested in Delhi for what apparently is a Facebook post or a social media post. And that's worrying because here is a police that's completely reluctant to take any action against someone in power. But Nikhil and Vaishali, same question. An organization of the size of Facebook being worried about government backlash, which means that there is no free market. Everybody is functioning in the fear of the government. Nikhil first.
Well, I think one simple example of how that operates is the budget. And you know this better than anyone else, Faye. How many industrialists go out and criticize the budget after it comes out? Why wouldn't the business be worried about government backlash? That's natural. And, I mean, the interesting thing about this Facebook situation is that every party is accusing Facebook of being biased against them. Like the Congress is accusing them, now the BJP is accusing them. The fact is, we need to take politics out of this and look at this purely from a hate speech perspective. And I disagree with Gopalji when he says about about the Supreme Court. In the Shreya Singhal judgment, there is a very clear definition of what constitutes restrictions on free speech. Actually, it narrows it down to say incitement of violence is a problem. And that's a clear violation of the law. And here you have a situation where there was incitement to violence. Death threats, rape threats are common on platforms across the board. But why don't we see more prosecutions happening there?
I'm saying
incitement to violence, freedom of speech stops where incitement to violence begins. There are reasonable restrictions in our constitutions. I agree. Please allow me to finish.
Let him finish.
Lastly, I don't think this is a market or this is an economy where businesses are operating without fear. In fact, there is more. Like I said, I'm more worried about more government control coming in. And the latest example of the BJP government being anti-market is this non-personal data consultation, the recommendation that's come in from MeitY, which basically leads to nationalization of data. So let's not talk about being pro-market because we haven't seen many policies, at least in the internet space, that are pro-market from the BJP so far. And I've been looking at this space for 13 years. The moment the government got into this space, the problems began for the space.
Vaishali?
So let me say, since time immemorial, we've always had a problem with implementation of legislation. How much ever good or robust legislation that we have, 66A, as Nikhil also pointed out earlier in his comments, that was struck down being unconstitutional because it did strangulate free speech and expression. But why did the Shreya Singhal case went right up to the Supreme Court? Simply because 66A, though may not have been happily worded, but it had the right checks and balances in place. But because of a police excess, the arrests were made. In fact, post those arrests, there was also a notification which was given out, which said that the police officers needed to have confirmation from their seniors before making any arrest under that section. But even when that did not go down well, finally 66A got challenged and they finally struck down.
I'm sorry, but that's not entirely correct, Vaishali, because 666A had a very clear, it was annoying content, disparaging content. Those are extra, those are not covered under restrictions to free speech in the Constitution.
Right.
And that's why it was declared unconstitutional. It did not have checks and balances, in fact.
So I want to agree to you, not fully, but to some extent, that, and I think I also said that it was not very happily worded. The wordings could have changed with Supreme Court's intervention. Striking it down is completely unconstitutional, has given a chance for a lot of these offenses going unnoticed, or we do not have a direct section under which we can charge people now. We have to look here and there, IPC, ITA Act, any other specialized legislation to actually invoke that section, so that people indulging in, say, hate speech, incitement to violence, defamation, or sexual violence, and then we have to invoke those sections. 66A was not happily worded, but I don't think it was completely, and there has been a lot of discussion on that post, and we're also considering that whether it should be reintroduced in some other form, the way other countries have regulated speech. We definitely don't want government control over speech, only to ensure that there are rights, checks and balances.
So hang on. So we've had Mr. Gopal Agarwal twice in this conversation say Facebook ought to be regulated. This is Facebook's worst nightmare. But is that the solution? And I also want to bring in Ritesh Bhatia, because I understand his internet is now working fine. Ritesh?
Hey, one more 10 seconds, I just want to intervene.
Okay.
That we regulated, I mean in limit that they cannot decide what is hate speech and what is not. And that right to decide what is hate speech or what has to go with the governance and the rules of the land, of law of the land. They should not be given the response. They cannot be given the whole responsibility to regulate the whole hate speech.
No, but that's exactly what's happening in the amendments to the IT rules. They're asking for proactive monitoring and takedowns of content by platforms. And so therefore, under the amendments to the IT rules, you're actually giving more responsibility to the platforms. That consultation
not at all. I have seen that. I am working. You
the amendments to the IT rules,
because we understand that
the amendments to the IT rules actually give
global data protection.
Amendments to the IT rules actually give more power to platforms.
No, I think it is, when I was talking about what is free speech, even the courts have at times defined it in a different way. They are saying that the right to speech, fundamental right to speech, limits a person's right to speech when it affects others. So these kind of
incitement to violence.
He hasn't spoken at all in this entire panel. That's really unfair. Ritesh, yes. Do you believe that Facebook, and here's the question, right? So effectively, if someone puts up something that is construed as hate speech, should it be up to Facebook to take it down? Should it be up to the police? Should it be up to the courts? Who decides what is hate speech? Do you think that regulating Facebook is the way forward?
So see, I wouldn't use the word regulating, but I would definitely put up the word of accountability. And there needs to be an accountability by themselves also. And there needs to be an accountability by the people who are there, by the government, by the police, everybody. Now let's understand Facebook has its community guidelines, and they got 3 tiers. Tier 1 talks about violence and incitement. Tier 2 talks about bullying. Tier 3 talks about hate speech. Tell me, what have they done in all these three tiers? I mean, every day on a daily basis, Faye, we see examples on tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and tier 2, which is bullying, that is like maximum. And what have they done? So they very clearly put it out in their policy, which is updated very frequently. And in fact, their vice president has come up with a blog also that we are not going to tolerate all this and the content will be removed. We are working very hard. Forget AI, forget the algorithms that even Nikhil and I said. I'm saying they have 24 hours people working 24 hours. Faye, they've also said that we have people who are from that particular country, so they understand the native languages also. So here is the thing. So and sometimes I always tell people, like, what do we expect from a company which itself has no ethics? I mean, they started with like kind of stalking and looking at everything, and what kind of ethics do I expect from them? It just comes right from top as such. And as far as and why shouldn't they, like, follow what is like for example, many of the times when we go and make a complaint, because we receive a lot of complaints for bullying and for, like, journalists and crimes against women and all, they say this doesn't affect our, I mean, this doesn't go against our community guideline. It may be not against your community guideline, but then as far as India is concerned, this is just not acceptable. Now, just look at McDonald's also. It decided that, okay, it's not going to serve a particular kind of a non-vegetarian thing, like a beef and all that. So when you are here in India, you got to be like that. So a regulation, I'm not like really for it, but definitely accountability. And your question was, who should we? It starts with them. And the moment when we people are reporting, or anybody is reporting, please take an action soon, because there have been people who committed suicide. We recently had a case of a boy who committed suicide because had Facebook brought down the posts and all that, even on Instagram, I think we could have also saved a life. And so before we start losing many more lives, I think this is high time they just not look at, like, all the time about their profits. If the platform only is not there, what will they do about the profits? Faye.
So I'm opening this up to the panel right now for solutions going forward. Like I said, my concerns here were with the comment that was made by T. Raja Singh, with the lack of reaction from Facebook, but most of all, the fact that big organizations feel they have to bend a certain way to stay within favor of government, because if they go against government, they will face the wrath of government. Nikhil, I'm going to ask you a question now as an entrepreneur. Process is punishment in this country for entrepreneurs. There's a lot of paperwork, there's a lot of hoops to jump through, and there is this constant reminder of you need to stay in the good books of the government. Is this how other organizations feel as well?
I think this is how pretty much every organization, every entrepreneur feels, because there's always this, like you said, the process is the punishment. But Faye, just in terms of solutions over here, look, we're damned if we do, we're damned if we don't in case of this. So we either are facing with a situation where Facebook is running amok and completely without oversight, and the other is where the government has control over what's allowed and what's not allowed. And both situations, I don't think are good for free speech. And so all said and done, the final accountability rests with our law enforcement agencies and our courts. But in case of Facebook, I think we need greater transparency in terms of process, in terms of decisions that they're taking. And there needs to be accountability both at a local level and a global level. Can there be a local, like they have a content, they have an experts group that is in a position to revoke certain censorship decisions that Facebook itself may have taken, and that has eminent people at a global level. Can you also take into account local nuances and create certain similar groups at a local level that may look at it from a nuanced perspective, understanding local sensitivities, but and also be in a position to look at decisions that are taken to not take down certain content when significant complaints have been filed, because they have they have a mechanism for moderating content or for putting content back up. But I just keep going back to that point. Incitement to violence happened here. Facebook didn't act on it. That's bad.
Yeah.
But our government and our courts and our police haven't acted on it. That's worse. Because final accountability lies with the police of that state, with the government of that state, with the courts of that state.
Yeah.
How can
So,
someone be allowed to incite violence and get away with it? And what are we doing? We're holding Facebook to account for it.
Yes, I also want to ask you this quick question, Nikhil. As far as WhatsApp is concerned,
Yeah.
how and there are millions and millions of people who use WhatsApp completely for free. Unlike your SMS, there's no charge per message sent. How does Facebook, which owns WhatsApp, monetize WhatsApp? How are they making money by running this very large app?
So far, they're not. But what they're planning to do is that, from what I can see, they're going the WeChat way, which is they will monetize through payments, they'll monetize through commerce. WeChat in China is a huge platform for transactions. You can book cabs, you can shop for things. And WhatsApp, with 400 million monthly active users, more than that, in fact, is in an ideal place. And that's why the Jio partnership with JioMart, because that will enable sellers to sell via WhatsApp with WhatsApp payments as well. I think that WhatsApp for business ecosystem is going to get rolled out. The thing with internet platforms is monetization doesn't necessarily happen on day one or even day 100. They build a large enough base, and then they monetize the platform. And I think, but from a speech perspective, WhatsApp is very tricky. It's one-to-one, and it's one to a group of people. It's not broadcast in that sense. And my biggest fear regarding another regulatory change that is happening through the intermediary rules is that traceability will become mandatory for WhatsApp if it goes through the way that it is. Now, WhatsApp as a platform is built so that you can't, you do not know the originator of that message. WhatsApp doesn't know the originator of that message. And so if WhatsApp has to trace the person, then it'll mean the end of end-to-end encryption on WhatsApp, which effectively means the end of privacy. So like I said, all we have right now are bad options. We are being forced to choose between free speech and privacy. We're being forced to choose between between liability for a platform that enables our free speech versus having incitement to violence. None of these situations is good for us as users.
Right. Dips has just written in saying we need serious critical thinking on social media like Facebook and Twitter. People are setting agendas on these platforms based on vested interests. And that's something that we should look at. I agree, which is the conversation.
There's nothing wrong with that, Faye. There's nothing wrong with that. The Supreme Court in its Shreya Singhal verdict very clearly said that advocacy is fine. Advocacy is a part of democratic processes. Incitement to violence is not.
Right. A question for Mr.
Hey.
Gopal. Yes.
Add
Yes.
my 2 cents to this.
अब बताइए आपका क्वेश्चन क्या है?
And Vaishali has something to say, and after that, I'll take the question to you, Mr.
Maybe I'm just going to digress a bit, because when we talk of implementation of the legislation that we already have and what the courts are doing and what the police machinery is doing, I think all this, sometimes it just ends up as a very elitist discussion. Because if we really look at ground reality, we are going back to the same judicial magistrate first class courts. We are going to the same police stations, which are totally ill-equipped to handle things with speed. JMFC courts are ill-equipped to handle things with speed. You have one adjudicating officer who is a bureaucrat, who is a secretary to the minister IT, who has so much else to do than look at cyber crime or cyber offense related cases. We have cases which have been filed 5 to 6 years back, and we've not been even given the first date of hearing. I mean, that is the futility of all this discussion when it comes to implementation. We have one appellate tribunal at Delhi. So imagine someone from some small town in Maharashtra who really wants to seek relief. Are we imagining that he's going to hire a lawyer in Delhi who will appear in TDSAT for him for relief? So all this, unless and until we really tackle this at grassroots level, all these policy making, changes in law, Supreme Court decisions, that is what 1%, 0.5% of all the cases that are happening across India. The rest of the cases do not even reach courts or the police stations, simply because
Yes.
the implementation machinery is dismal. I have been practicing in this field for the last 20 years, and it is absolutely frustrating to try to tell your client that, okay, we try our best, but are you really assured of any sort of order which even has a semblance of justice? It is next to impossible. So I think unless and until we all have a unified voice, that if you want Information Technology Act to be implemented, ensure that there are proper forums who work, and not work part-time, not work once a month or once in 15 days when they don't have anything else to do. Okay, now I have time to look at a cyber offense case that has been filed 5 years back. In this lockdown, filing has stopped. There is no communication from these tribunals. So I mean, what are we even talking about when it comes to implementation of legislation? And it is 20 years since the Information Technology Act has been passed. We still refer to that as new legislation. I mean, how ridiculous can that be too?
That's true. In fact, it's ridiculous that we have an IT Act that's 20 years old, that was written back in the year 2000. I mean, think back to what life was like in the year 2000. What technology were you using? What your phone was like? What apps were available? Which are none. It was even Facebook around in our lives at that point, and to what extent? So our laws have just not kept up. So the question to Mr. Agarwal from Tanvi D is this. Can the BJP take Facebook to court for encouraging or bypassing hate speech that could have incited violence?
I don't think BJP is at current point of time thinking of taking Facebook to the court, etc. It's not the thing, but the issue is here everybody is talking about accountability. And I tell you one thing is that in the democratic process, the elected government has the highest accountability. If you want to rest that accountability and judge that accountability to anything, we should consider this. We have been talking on many platforms, and then we start with this assumption that the government is biased. Government is not acting in the right manner. This is not the right way of thinking, because government is not individual. Government has many institutions. In democracy, after several decades of after several centuries of understanding, democracy is the best form of governance, and democracy is based on various institutions. So the democratic institutions formed by the government over the year are more accountable to the people. So individual commercial organization, like we have Competition Commission of India, we have other regulators, they should regulate, because even if they have bias, we have certain reservation with the police, with the courts, with other government institutions, but still they are the best. Nikhil ji has been talking, ye problem hai, wo problem. Unless you want to continue discussion only the problems, then it's all right. But ultimately the solution is that we should have faith in the government. We have elected the government. It is for 5 years. Till the government has, people have the highest power, and no other institution is accountable other than the politicians. Politicians are accountable to the people, and the power rests with the people.
Okay.
So
quick question, Mr. Agarwal, quick question, just to help our audience understand. And when we are talking about, comments made by politicians on Facebook and different kinds of things, I want to understand from you, because you're a politician, you've been an active part of many election campaigns. How important is social media, or the or unbiased in social media? How important has social media become as part of election campaigns on various levels?
For democracy, every form of communication is very important. You cannot just blame any system. If you are speaking through to a TV debate, if you are talking, communicating through a online platform, if you are talking through a rally, etc., there are instant issues. But ultimately, for democracy, the more the institutions, better it is. And communication is the only way. Let people decide what is right and wrong, what is good for them or not. Rules and regulation are to be provided by the parliament. There are different roles in the democracy itself. Rules have to be formulated by the parliament. If the process is going through the parliament, then why we are objecting about the rules? So you have the process of giving your opinion that will be incorporated. Standing committees are there. Whole process is there. So ultimately, our faith in the governance has to increase with all the limitations. Still, we have to understand that the government is the most accountable and they should regulate these things, because ultimately, who will balance them? If there is a WhatsApp and WeChat and the Facebook and the other platforms, Twitter, etc., they will definitely look for their own interest. Ultimately, government will have to balance, and government will balance through rules and regulations. And there will be
fundamentally, this is actually, so like Nikhil said in the very beginning, it's a difficult choice. Do we want the government to regulate these platforms, and thereby do you want the, because we've seen governments are very quick to actually pick up journalists, not so quick to actually prosecute members of political parties. So while one member of a political party who is established, who is actually a serving minister, will say Goli Maro Salon ko, that didn't seem like a problem to anyone, but one journalist gets picked up. And at the same time, I want to bring to the attention of the panel one individual called Hindustani Bhav, whose Instagram handle regularly puts out threats of the worst kind, rape threats, death threats of the worst kind, and nothing happens. Nobody takes any action. Now the Instagram is owned by Facebook. So what is the solution for the problem called Hindustani Bhav? Nikhil, is the solution that we force Instagram and Facebook to take action? I also want to point out YouTube has not taken any action either. Or is it that the government, like Mr. Gopal Agarwal has pointed out, since these platforms are not taking action, the government needs to step in and regulate?
Right. And where is the government taking action? I mean, like you said, the statement Goli Maro Saloko, where is Delhi police? What happened to those charge sheets or FIRs, whatever? So like I said, I don't see why we should trust the government. Our constitution was created to protect and our fundamental rights essentially protect citizens from the government. And we've seen our government go to court and say that privacy isn't a fundamental right. So, I don't buy this whole thing about trusting the government. We need to keep questioning them. We need to hold them to account. We need to hold our institutions to account. And our institutions, in many cases, have been failing us. We have to hold our platforms to account also. And I think there needs to be greater accountability, transparency for the platforms. But I'm just worried that, the moment the government gets into this game, they're going to then create norms just like they did with 66A, where speech is curtailed and platforms will be held liable for things that they don't need to be held liable, and that will be used as a lever to manipulate. You've seen in case of television and in case of print, the DAVP and government advertising is also used as a tool by governments, local, national, to manipulate or to pressurize channels. You have regulations for media organizations that the government wants more levers. One thing that you can see over here is that both political parties, large political parties, are asking for more regulation because it gives them a lever. In 66A judgment, the Supreme Court said governments will come and governments will go, but the laws will remain. And the bad law that was there had to be struck down for that reason. And so I think for us, we have to keep questioning the actions of the government, and we have to also question the actions of the platforms.
Absolutely. I'm going to have to leave it here because we've run out of time, but very interesting points of view. So this is where we are. Let me give you an example. If you consider the people on this panel, let's assume this panel is a platform for free speech. Now, Nikhil and argument's sake, Mr. Gopal Agarwal disagree with each other. But as a platform, if I were to mute Nikhil's mic and only allow Mr. Gopal Agarwal's mic to run, I'm effectively being unfair. Now, there is that kind of opacity within Facebook. because they're able to make these calls on whose messages get put forward on Facebook, whose page gets taken down, whose page basically gets suspended for a few days, and whose doesn't. We don't know why and if they are making the right calls. As a result, what you read on Facebook, the number of messages that can actually reach you on WhatsApp, the number of messages that can get pulled back on WhatsApp, what you see on Instagram, pages that can get taken down, pages that can be allowed to flourish, all of this is actually left to the discretion of Facebook as a company. What Nikhil is saying is very right. If we bring in the government and allow the government to regulate, then what is stopping the government to regulate in a fashion that suits it? Because effectively, the government will be regulating a platform, like Mr. Agarwal pointed out, that helps it a great deal in the next election. So that is also a situation that you can't have. So for the time being, there is no clear answer, and there's no clear answer across the world. Facebook has actually stood up to US Congress and said, we will not moderate false political ads and hate speech. We believe this is freedom of speech. Everybody should be allowed to say whatever they want. What we need to do in the meantime as audience members is we need to constantly remember that what you're reading is not the whole truth, because there is someone on the other side of your phone who's moderating and pushing things for you to make you believe certain things. So we have to now exercise a certain level of question mark every time we see something on WhatsApp or Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter, or all of these other places. Unfortunately, I know it sounds like a lot of work, but that's where we are in the meantime, because these organizations have gained such a massive amount of influence on our lives. They have become interesting to various political parties, and those political parties will continue to influence us. The only way to actually guard ourselves is to question everything you read for the time being and hope that there is a solution that comes in through our judiciary and through lawmaking that serves the citizen best. But for now, we don't have it. Thank you for watching. Good night.